Well, good afternoon. My meeting ended a little early, so we're starting here at 4:35. Some of my picture may not be visible because the screen's not set up right, and I don't want to change it, but you should be able to see things that we're going to put up on the screen. We're going to talk about, pardon me, Chapter 7, 8, and 9 tonight. Chapter 7, which we have on the screen now, Management and Leadership. Then we'll move to Chapter 8, Restructuring Organizations for Today's Challenges. And then finally, we'll discuss Production and Operations Management. So let's look at our learning objectives for Chapter 7. Describe the changes occurring today in management function. Describe the 4 functions of management. Relate the planning process and decision-making to accomplishment of company goals, organization goals if you prefer. Describe the organization function of management. Explain the difference between leaders and managers and describe the various leadership styles. Now, we're going to talk about 3 leadership styles in this text. You may be exposed to different leadership styles in other courses that you're taking here at Union. And then finally, we're going to summarize the 5 steps of the control function. All right. The question that is on your screen and is posed here is, what is management? It's all the things that people use to accomplish the goals set forth by the organization. And they come from the 4 functions of management. Now, we speak of these as 4 functions of management. This does not mean that there are not 4 functions of leadership, because they can blend over. They're planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. Notice both your employees and the resources within the organization, bringing them together, putting them to work to achieve the organization's goals and objectives. This particular slide talks about today's managers. It talks about them being younger. Well, of course, we expect that. The baby boomers are leaving the workforce. And that we have more women in the workforce. We also have more minorities in the workforce. We tend to emphasize teams more today than we have in the past. And notice the last bullet. I think it's probably the most important, and I think it's always been the most important. And that is that managers must be skilled in communications. Now, one of the reasons that we have as many managers as we had, had as many managers as we did in years gone past, is because one of the primary responsibilities of the manager, and still is today in some respects, was to pass on to the rank and file employee what needed to be done. Here's the mission, here's the goals, here's the objectives, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need that as much today, since we have the medium that I'm using here today to address each of you and talk to each of you, and hopefully you will be able to call back to me and we'll discuss certain things. So we can communicate a lot quicker, a lot better, and we can get that communication across without the delay and all, without the layers that we used to have years ago. But that doesn't still mean that a manager doesn't have to be a good communicator. He or she must be able to do that. They must be able to get the message across, and they must be able to present it in such a way that the employee buys into what needs to be done. This particular slide just talks about respect and how to get it. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I want you to notice that strong management skills are very important, as well as business strategy and ethical practices, etc. Education matters, but we also know that there are a number of very successful people who have been in management leadership positions that do not have college educations. And Bill Gates is certainly one. The late Steve Jobs was another. And there are others besides those that come to my mind. Let's look at the 4 functions of management, because this is very important for all of us to know and understand. And you'll find this depicted in your text on figure 7.1 at the bottom of page 187, excuse me. I didn't read properly. The 4 functions, as we mentioned before: planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. And I'm not going to go through each one of those bullets, but planning is exactly what it says. This is the start stage. This is saying when an organization begins who we are, what we intend to provide to society. And we set standards here and a few other things. From planning derives, now I will do this differently than what the text does. I think you have to organize first before you can decide to lead. I don't think you can lead without an organization. I think there need to be some parameters there. But I won't disagree with it. Matter of fact, when I first started teaching this course, and when I was first exposed to the 4 functions of management, it was always planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. So I won't fuss at all if you want to interpose those 2, but I think you have to have organization before you can begin leadership. Organizing, just saying, okay, what is it we need, and providing those resources to people to work. You can't, you can't expect people to be able to do their jobs unless they have the adequate resources, the tools to do the job. And then also organizing is putting people where they can do the best for you, for the company, and for themselves. Maybe not necessarily in the order in which I gave them to you. It can be in any one of those orders as long as they're together. And remember that each of those 3 complements and is related to each of the others. And leading. Leading, and we'll talk about this in the text, and I'm just going to cut to the chase here and say leading is creating a vision. Here's where we are today. Here's where we want to go. And what a leader must do is to get his or her followers, in this case we're going to call them employees, to buy into that vision. And once that's accomplished, then they can do many, 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 many things together. And the last is controlling. Pardon me. Now, some will object to the word controlling because they see it as being arbitrary, as kind of like sitting on employees and with a rod there, a stick and a carrot, except forget the carrot, only have the stick, and asking them what to do. No, that's not that. It is, you set the standards in the planning stage. Now, this is measuring your output, your final product, against those standards. And you do this through the entire production stage, not just at the end. We'll talk a little bit more about controlling when we address that at the end of the chapter, that particular function. Making sure that you take corrective action when it's needed, making sure people know they're doing a good job when they do a good job, and making sure that as you monitor performance, standards are changed or adjusted as need be. Now, standard changed or adjusted. I guess you could say an adjustment's a change, but an adjustment isn't necessarily a complete change. So think of those as a little bit different there, if you would. Now, this sharing the vision, we talked about this. This vision is, it tells people, as it says on the slide, why we're in business. We're in business to make this product. We're in business to deliver this service. And then where we intend to go to move forward, what it is we want to do. After we've developed the mission statement, then we develop, after we develop the vision statement, I beg your pardon there, we develop the mission statement. And notice what it says here. It's our philosophy. It talks about what our customers need and how we intend to meet those needs Remember, sometimes they're not needs, they're wants. Uh, Something about our survival, about social responsibility, about sustaining the environment, which is not here, and also the nature of the product or service that we're going to provide the consuming public. So after we do the vision, then we do the mission statement, then we come up with the goals and objectives. Notice what the goals are. They are broad, long-term things we intend to accomplish, to be able to do. We want to be able to do those things. The objectives tell us how we're going to attain those goals. And we're going to find that objectives come in different categories as opposed to goals do. Now, we take a little bit of digression here, and we talk about, I suppose, in a way, before you set objectives, you want to look at what your organization is made of, what its SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, you can see that SWOT analysis is a very good thing to do. And it should be something that's done on a fairly routine basis, not just done once and then put up on a shelf and nobody look at it again. Strengths and weaknesses are considered internal. And what we want to do, and the strengths, obviously, what we do best. Weaknesses are what things do we need to improve upon, or what is it that we should be doing that we're not being doing, that we're not doing. So what you want to do is you want to move the weaknesses to strengths. Remember that those are internal. External are opportunities and threats. Look at opportunities as what areas can we move into to market our goods and services. Where can we be more, what allows us to be more effective? What's out there that is going to set us apart from somebody else? And threats, I think the best way to look at threats more than anything else is what's our competition? What do we have to be concerned about? Are there things that we may do to the environment that are going to cause us problems? And again, you want to move threats to opportunities and or eliminate the threats. So we've done this, and then we need to look, and by the way, this is not necessarily linear. You could do this separately if you wish. Some of it can be done at the same time, although everything has to be brought together and sort of looked at together to get a good feel of what we're doing. The planning function, and I think that's one of the reasons they put it this way, because even though this talks in some cases about objectives here, it comes after a SWOT analysis. So we're planning. Pardon me. Pardon me again. And we have 4 types of planning here. Strategic, that's done by the big boys and girls upstairs in the corner offices. We're setting our long-range goals, etc. And then tactical planning is identifying what needs to be done on, normally talking here on a short range basis. Now, strategic planning, let's just back up just a second, that can be thought of as perhaps 2 to 5 years. Sometimes you'll hear 10, some less often you'll hear 20. But really, when you get past 5, and some people will actually say 3 and not 5, you need to think about that. Whereas tactical planning probably is in a year basis or less. Notice it says short range. And these are set by, now it says lower level managers, it could be set, I think, by middle managers and by your first line manager or supervisor. Then we have operational planning. That's where the rubber meets the road. Here we're doing things like setting schedules, setting work agendas, and things of that nature, and making sure that the standards we have are what they're supposed to be, and maybe even thinking about having new standards against which to measure our final product or service. And then finally, we have contingency planning. That is in case all else fails. So there should always be a contingency plan. You may want to call it an alternative plan. That's fine. But we need to think in that role. Now, you can see the SWOT analysis, figure 7.2 at the top of page 190. You can see the planning scenarios we've just talked about here at figure 7.3 at the top of page 191. Next, we come to something that we all do on a routine basis, and we don't always think about. That's decision planning, or decision making, I should say, not decision planning, decision making. And here, we're choosing between two or more alternatives to decide what it is that we want to do. And we have a way to evaluate that, and we're going to talk about decision making. And we're going to look at what's known as the rational decision model, which you can see outlined in your text on page 192. There's not a figure there, but you can see that out. The first thing we have to do is we must define what the issue is. Now, I want to put this in perspective for you so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. When I taught this when I taught this class in a face-to-face setting, I would pose this problem to students. You own a car dealership, automobile dealership, and your sales are down. So you called all your chiefs in, the marketing person, well, new car salesperson, let's say, perhaps your marketing person, your service people, used car salespeople, and anybody else that you want to bring into that is going to say, and you say, okay, our sales are down. Why are sales down? And so the sales manager says, we don't have models that can compete with our competitors. And the service manager says, well, our cars break down too often. People have to bring them back for service. And somebody else says, we're in a poor location. And somebody else says, well, not only can't we compete, we need to get a different product here. We need to sell a different type of car. And you may get 4 or 5 more answers. So the question is posed, what's the issue? You don't know. From all of that that's being said to you without doing a lot of analysis, all you know is that your car sales are down, but you really don't know why. So what you have to do is make sure, that's why I talked about, make sure that you know what the issue is. It says define the situation. Make sure that you center on the issue and address the issue and not one of the symptoms. Symptoms could be poor product. Symptoms could be cars break down too often. Symptoms could be, or a symptom could be, we're in a poor location. But none of those may be the reason, the issue for the car sales being low. So that's why this is important. And that's the next step, which I kind of talked about without saying it right away. Get all the information that you need to get and analyze it. Then you develop a course or courses of action, here known as alternatives. Decide which course of action is best for all constituents. What's going to give you the biggest payback once you choose that alternative? Once you've chosen the alternative, do what the alternative says you're supposed to do. You already constructed that put it out on paper, et cetera, et cetera. Then you evaluate your decision to know whether it was good or bad, and obviously follow up. So that is known as the rational decision-making model. You may be exposed to other decision-making models as you go through your course of studies here, but this is certainly one that will serve you very well. Now, problem solving, of course, goes along with that decision making. You're trying to solve the problem. And problem solving here, as it's used, is talking about taking care of routine problems. Notice everyday problems. So we don't have to go through the formal decision making process. And we have something in place that allows us to address those problems because they occur frequently. We know what the problem is, we know what the solution is, and we can implement it without going through a decision-making process. Now, there are a number of problem-solving techniques, including brainstorming and PMI. PMI just talks about putting the pluses and minuses together like you would do in a checkbook, and then looking for a solution. This next gives us what's known as the levels of management. And we see the, think of it as it's shown here on the slide, and you can see it in your text, figure 7.4, the bottom of page 193. It's a pyramid. And we have the broad base of employees, rank and file employees, like I like to refer to them. And these are folks that do not supervise others at the bottom. And then we move up to the supervisor level. That's your first line manager and or supervisor. Notice it also talks about foremen and department heads and things of that nature. Then we move to middle management. Notice what they have various terms there for those folks, plant managers and division heads, etc. Branch managers. I can tell you in many places, a plant manager is considered maybe above middle management, but a little below top management. And it just depends upon the organization and how they want to view that particular position. In the top management, your CEO and chief financial officer, chief information officer, and executive vice presidents. Now, one of the things we want to talk about here are, and this is something that's very important for all of us to know, is managerial skills. Now, we can morph some of this over to leadership skills as well, but since we're talking about management here, we want to talk about them and put it in management perspectives. And by the way, you can see the slide that we're going to talk about shortly at the bottom of page 194 of figure 7.5. Technical skills are those that are required by, first of all, obviously, the first line worker, but the person who supervises that person or persons, regardless of what managerial position we want to give him or her, supervisor, foreman, etc., they have to have the commensurate technical skills as the people that they're supervising. Maybe not to the same exact standard, but they have to have them, they have to hold them. If you put a person in there who does not have those technical skills, he or she will be suspect. Human relations skills are needed certainly by those that have the technical skills, but that's the lesser quality than the person who is next up the ladder, or a middle manager, who would need to be able to communicate and motivate and things of that nature. That person will need fewer technical skills, but many, many, many human relations skills, or at least to have them honed to a fine ability. Conceptual skills are those needed by the folks on top because they're looking at the big picture. They're looking at the organization as a whole, as the slide here says. And they're trying to make sure that all the parts fit together well. Do they need technical skills? Yes. Not as many. Do they need human relations skills? Yes, not as many. They really need conceptual skills to a large extent. And this is the slide I was speaking of, 7.4 in your text, and you can see how we move or how that's set up. Very important, but that doesn't mean to diminish them. Now, it's always good when a top manager has technical skills. Andrew Grove, who was a CEO of Intel for a long period of time, could walk down to the research and development department of Intel, and not only did he have a great reception because he was the CEO, was coming to visit them, he had a scientific background, and they had a PhD in chemistry, as my memory serves me. And so he could walk in and talk to those folks on the same level that they were talking to each other. But he certainly still had to have the conceptual skills as well. These are the most basic human relations skills, saying thank you. That is the biggest one. Tell people thank you. I appreciate what you've done, etc. Here's what business leaders need to understand and why they need to be refreshed. It says they're going back to school, but that could be continuing education, could be a number of things. International, political, legal, and regulatory systems, so they know that. You cannot go into doing international business or global trade unless you understand those other areas. Now, I say you cannot. Yes, of course you can, but you're not going to be very successful. This is a kind of simplified slide in a way, this staffing slide, because we're going to talk a little bit more about it when we get to the chapter on human resource management, which is next week. But staffing is very important because this involves recruiting. Then once you do the recruiting selection, they use selection. I use selection instead of hiring because you have to select people to go to the next step, and then you're going to hire from those that you've selected. Then people have to be motivated. That's a different step in a different area. And you need to retain the best people possible. Why? It's very expensive to replace an employee, regardless of how that employee left, whether he or she left due to retirement or was promoted to a different position or was fired, etc. Very different, very expensive because of all the steps that you have to go through. Notice the last one there. Many people simply are not willing to work for a company unless they receive fair treatment. The man with the beer there is the guy who started Sam Adams Brewery. His name is Jeff Koch. If you're interested, has roots here to Cincinnati. His grandfather was a master brewer for one of the local breweries many years ago. And we're back to what we talked about, the leader creating a vision and getting people to buy into that vision. He or she has to establish the values. We talked about that in chapter 4. And then he has or she has to emulate those. The same thing goes with corporate ethics. That goes again with what we talked about in chapter 4 last week. Embrace change, which means that he or she tolerates risk, is into ambiguity, which means we're not sure what's going to happen. And then the last, which goes actually back to values and ethics, hold people responsible and accountable. And when you hold people both accountable and responsible, you're giving them some type of empowerment, which is the term we're going to talk about, and we've talked about before, we're going to talk about again, and giving people the authority to act. That's what you're doing here. This talks about accountability through transparency, and that simply means, making sure that people understand what the company stands for, what you say, and everybody can pick up your bottom line score sheet, for lack of a better term, and understand exactly what you're doing. It's not created or written in a bunch of mumbo jumbo or fine print. It's very difficult for people to read, and now to read, to comprehend. And it's not that those people put yourselves in the same category. I put myself in the same category. Not that you can't comprehend that, but that print is so small, and you have to pay so much attention to being able to read that print that sometimes you've forgotten what the heck you're reading. That's all transparency means. It means be clear. It means being open so people understand what you're trying to get across. The text here presents three types of leadership. Now you can see a chart, which is the next slide, figure 7 point, excuse me, I have to stop and look at here for a second. Doesn't have it here, but it's at the bottom of page 197. Should be figure 7.6, I believe, but it doesn't show it that way. Yes, it is. I didn't look at it correctly. Three types: autocratic, participative, or democratic leadership, and then finally free rein. Pretty simple. Autocratic, that person makes all the decisions. And in the previous text, they used to show the Duke basketball coach, Mike Krzyzewski, because he was perceived to be that way. He made all the decisions. Players didn't make decisions. Participative or democratic leadership, this simply means that everybody kind of gets together, talks about what's going on, and there's a joint decision-making process. Yes, the leader is the person who is going to implement that decision, but there's an allowance here for getting other input. Free rein is a step above or a step away from, if you will, democratic and participative. Here, the manager said, all right, this is what you can do, and here are the parameters. Here are the boundaries, if you will. And then the employee or employees are free to do whatever needs to be done within those boundaries and to help them accomplish a goal. So they're going to take action on their own to get to where the leader wants them to be. And the leader says, okay, here's our boundaries, and then here's where we're going to go work. Difference between what the slide says and what I say, they use the word objectives. That's fine. I've used the term boundaries, but here's the objectives. All right. Is there such a thing as a natural born leader? Some would say yes, many others would say no. Leaders fall into 4 categories: rationalists, humanists, politicists, and culturists. And we're not going to spend a great deal of time on those 4, just to let you know that they're there. Here we are talking about empowerment again. It'll be talked about again in one of the later chapters, I believe chapter 10. This is just giving your employees the authority to act, to make decisions on their own without having to go back and ask the boss what to do. This is often talked about with people who are in the service business, who are answering telephones, etc., and addressing customers' issues and complaints, etc., etc. And you see that the customers need to be handled as quickly and as expeditiously as possible. So when you're helping these people, these employees, take on more responsibility, you have to show them what you want done, and then you have to get out of their way. if they've made a decision that you do not like, after you have given them authority to make a decision, you have to accept what they have done. Now, you might take them off and you should take them off to the side and say, no, that's not the right decision. Here's what needs to be done. But you don't excoriate them in front of their peers and fellow workers. You just say, okay, I don't want you to do it that way again, but I want you to continue having the authority. And obviously, you have to give them all the resources they need, and you have to educate them in some aspect as to what you expect. This is something we need to do. We need to keep people, keep knowledge and keep that knowledge accessible so people know where it is. So we're not, as the slide says, reinventing the wheel. Now we come to the last part of Chapter 7, and that is steps in the controlling process. You'll see this at figure 7.7 to the bottom of page 201. So you start with the fact that, let's say you're producing widgets, and you have standards. The widget has to be within certain tolerance, and you set the widget through the production phase. And so all during the production phase, you're monitoring the performance. Now, what that performance is the production performance. And then you're going to, once you're finished, I'm going to go through this one time, I'll come back. You compare the results against standards, let everybody know what the results are, and then take action if necessary. And then, of course, you repeat the cycle. But there is a question you asked down here: are the standards realistic? Now, as I said, you're monitoring this through the entire production process. So what this means is, while the monitoring is going on, if during the production process you find something that's out of tolerance, out of specification, out of standard, you stop the process. You don't let that go through, because if you do let it go through, then all you're going to have at the end is scrap, which has to be thrown away. That's what the old thing about quality control was. Companies had people at the end of the production process who did quality control, and they would inspect what was produced, and if it didn't meet specifications, it went to the scrap heap. Well, it doesn't do you any good if all you're doing is running this thing goes through the process, and then you're going to have stuff going to the scrap heap. You need to find out what the issues are first, or during the process, and then take corrective action then. It doesn't do you any good to continue having things go to the scrap heap, because all that is, that's waste, that's lost production time, it's lost money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that brings us to the end of Chapter 7. We are at 5:13. We're going to take a short break to 5:16, and we'll come back and talk about restructuring organizations. Please come back at 5:16. Thank you. Structuring organizations for today's challenges, Chapter 8. You may also want to think of this as reorganization. Let's look at our learning objectives. Outline the basic principles of organization management. Compare the organizational theories of Fayol and Weber. It's spelled Weber for those of us that speak English, but he was German, and therefore it's Weber. Evaluate the choices managers make in structuring organizations. Contrast the various organizational models. Identify the benefits of inter-firm cooperation and coordination. And finally, explain how organizational culture can help businesses adapt to change. Notice this particular slide. It says that everyone is reorganizing, or reorganization is for everyone, if you prefer. And it just enumerates people in different industries and businesses that are reorganizing. Everyone has to adjust to the new reality. I noticed that there was an article in the USA Today section of the local Cincinnati paper today. Talked about Amazon. And Amazon says it's going to create 100,000 jobs in the next couple of years, I think. For every job that Amazon creates, now, by the way, when I say this, I'm not demeaning Amazon. But for every job that Amazon creates, it puts a person who works in a retail store, such as Macy's or Nordstrom or something like that, out of a job. That is this new reality that we have. Buying on the internet, buying through the internet, internet shopping, online shopping, whatever you want to call about it. Now, it is true that we are adjusting to market change. That's market change in the United States. It's market change internationally or globally, if you prefer to use that word. It's things that we have to adjust to. We cannot stick our head in the sand and try to return to things that worked in the 1950s. So, but in some cases, we have to remember basic organizational principles, as it says here on the slide. Those things pretty much have not gone out of style. Why do we change? Well, we kind of addressed some of this on the last slide. We have a lot of competition. It's both global and changing the nature of business. Now, what it says there at the second bullet, a declining economy, I do not agree with. What I would say is that our economy is not growing as fast as we would like for it to grow, but it is growing. And if you look back to what happened at late 2007 and early 2008, when the great economic recession meltdown started, the economy has changed a great deal, and it's gotten better. The number of jobs that have been added to the economy have really helped a great deal. But what's the problem? The problem is that many of the jobs that have been created did not replace, monetarily wise, the jobs that were lost. And those jobs that were lost, unfortunately, will probably not come back. So we do have a strengthening economy, but not quite the way some people would like to see it. We're not going to bring coal miner jobs back. We're not going to bring steel mill jobs back. We're not going to bring a lot of those things back. And if you want to work in an industry that doesn't require what we would say is a lot of education, say the automobile industry, as some are working on a production line, you still have to know how to operate a computer, because much of that work is done by computers. And the next thing it talks about here, and this is an issue that we have to really think about, pardon me, faster technological change. If you only think about what's been in the news lately about driverless automobiles and driverless vehicles, and they're going to be on us quicker than what we believe, I would say within the next 5 years, maybe even less. What does that do for the 1.7 million or more people who drive vehicles for a living to deliver product? That's going to put those folks out of work. Maybe not all of them right away, but it's eventually going to put them all out of work. And what is the deal about this? Well, you don't have to pay uh, Social Security for a driverless vehicle. You don't have to pay workers' compensation for a driverless vehicle. You don't have to pay health benefits for a driverless vehicle. So that's a big issue for us. And one of the problems that we have, we humans, and by the way, I'm not talking to anybody other than all of us, me included. This change happens upon us so fast that we're not ready for it, and we've not planned for it. And we need to think about those types of things. Now we've gone from production management. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. We'll talk more about this in chapter 9. We've gotten things that mass production, and that helps us in some respects, and doesn't help us in other respects. If we can mass produce, then we may need fewer workers. And notice that if we reduce our production costs because of being able to purchase in bulk, does that mean that we can reduce our workforce? Well, in many cases it does. Henri Fayol was a Frenchman who came up with his principles, and the principles are principles of organization, and they're listed for you on page 215 in the text. And I'm not going to go over all of these. You can read these for yourselves, but there's some things here that we need to think about that really still are around. Unity of command. You cannot have more than one boss. It's impossible. You have to have a division of labor. He talks about a degree of centralization. Many of our newer companies would argue with that. They like decentralization and flatter organizations, but you still see some centralization. One of the things that he talks about here is clear lines of communication. And so I think we see that. He also talks about esprit de corps. If you don't have people that like their jobs, they're not going to do good work. So let's just talk a little bit about Henri Fayol, and notice the thing about rigid organizations. They just are not so much non-responsive, but they take too long to respond. How many times have you been called someone and said, you know, I've got a problem with this product, and you didn't get an answer very quickly? You hung up the phone. And you may say, the next time I buy something like this, I'm not going to buy it from XYZ Corporation. So that's Henri Fayol. So I didn't mean to keep him up. I'm about to get to Max Weber, but I didn't quickly enough. Notice what Weber says at the beginning is one of his principles. Employees need to do what they're told. It also talks about our friend Fred Taylor. We're going to talk about Fred Taylor next week. His father of scientific management. I don't know how much, I don't remember how much he got from Weber, but he certainly got some of it, because when we talk about Fred Taylor next week, some of what we have here from Weber will come back to you. So these are Weber pretty much took along what Fayol said, and he added these particular things. Job descriptions, rules and standards that are written. That same thing down here, regulations, and they're consistent. They don't change from day to day, from hour to hour. And then finally, staffing and promotion based upon qualifications. Now, some of what Weber talked about, and we see on this particular slide, is what we think of today as a bureaucracy. Now, most of us tend to think of a bureaucracy as being the federal government or state government or something of that nature. And I would tell you, without fear of contradiction, that one of the biggest bureaucracies in the United States for a long period of time was not the federal government, was not the state of New York government. I'm talking about states with big populations, or the state of California. I'm leaving Texas and Florida out because they came to population booms later than the other two did. It was General Motors, a huge, huge, huge company. So here are some other things that Fayol and Weber talked about. Hierarchy. Again, we're talking about one person being in charge of a particular thing, and a chain of command, knowing what you do, not only who's in charge, but where you fit within the chain of command. Now, chain of command tends to be rigid in places, certainly is in the military. It is in other places as well. We've gotten away from a lot of that and tried to make sure that we're getting input from employees so we can think about things. One of the best ways to find out about how things are going is do what's known as, or used to be known as, management by walking around and going up to an employee and ask him or her what he or she is doing, and then do they like it? Could it be improved? And things of that nature. One of the next concepts we talk about is known as an organizational chart. This is just a visual diagram showing reporting relationships and people's places in the organization and where they fit. We used to call it wiring diagram when I was in the Army. It's the same thing. So it's not a particular thing. And we're going to show a couple of organization charts, and you can see this one in your text at the top of page 217, figure 8.1. All this is doing is showing the president of the organization at the top, president and CEO, perhaps you prefer, and then 3 direct reports to him, manager of production, of marketing, and of finance. And then at each one of those managers has a first-line supervisor under him, and then under the first-line supervisor are X number of employees. Simple organization chart. Now we're going to come to the word that nobody likes, and that is bureaucracy. Notice what it says here, and this is true. It tends to be an organization that has many layers of managers, and there are specific rules of conduct. That's what I'm going to use that. Specific rules about how you're supposed to act and what you're supposed to do. And obviously with that goes regulations, etc. One of the things that I think most people forget, and I was in the military for many, many years, very big bureaucratic organization, is that a bureaucracy only tells you what you can't do. It doesn't tell you what you can do. And so it doesn't say that you can't break rules. It doesn't say you can't do this if you're focused on doing certain things. Now, yeah, you have to follow rules, and if you follow the rules, so where all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, it's probably going to take you a couple of weeks or longer to be able to handle a situation. And bureaucracy does annoy people when you get a hold of somebody and say, oh, well, I have to talk to this person, that person, some other person. That's why we talk so much and emphasize so much. And you've heard it before. You heard it the last chapter. You're going to hear it a couple chapters ahead of you next week. Empowerment, giving people authority to act. Do we need rules? Yes. Do we need regulations? Yes. But they shouldn't be stifling. When you need to give a customer immediate service and take care of his or her issues, that needs to be done. Centralized authorities, that's exactly what it says, where all the authorities made upstairs by the big boys and the big girls. Decentralized authority, and here we're talking a way a little bit of bringing empowerment back into the situation, is when decision making is delegated to the lowest possible level to make the decision to make things happen. Now, obviously, you don't want to put it down past the lowest possible level to where somebody doesn't know exactly what's supposed to transpire. So what you're doing is you're trying to put it someplace where the people who have knowledge can handle the situation as quickly as possible without having to refer to someone in higher authority. And of course, customers like that. Now, this gives us some advantages and disadvantages of centralized and decentralized authority. You can see this at the bottom of page 218, figure 8.2. I'm not going to talk about all of these, but an advantage of central authority tends to lead to more efficiency because decisions are controlled. A big disadvantage is it tends not to be responsive. And obviously there's no empowerment, and it can cause lower morale. Decentralized, faster decision making, higher morale, but you may not be as efficient, and you may have a weakened corporate image. Span of control simply means the number of people that one manager can supervise at a period of time. Since we have the emphasis on eliminating middle management today, the span of control has gotten much wider, and that's much of it's due to what we're using here tonight to deliver this presentation, medium of a PC. A couple different types of organization structures: tall structure and flat structure. You're going to find a tall structure when you have centralized authority. And notice it goes this way because you have so many levels of management. Flatter organization, just the reverse, and you're trying to get to people as quickly as possible. Here is an example of a flat organization, figure 8.3 in your text. Now let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. Narrow or tall, you're going to have better supervision and better specialization. But on the disadvantages, you're not going to have this. This, by the way, they have this messed up here. It could be less responsive to customers and slower decision making. On the broad side, and I apologize for that, I don't have any control over these. Broad side, you're going to have more empowerment, not less, and you're going to have greater responsiveness to customers. So you may have faster decision making, and you're probably going to have more empowerment. I apologize for that. I believe that I'm not sure I agree with the figure 8.4 because in a broad span of control, you're going to have more empowerment. You simply have to have. So I think that's gotten screwed up there. I apologize for that, but we need to move on, not pay a whole lot of attention to it. Now we structure organizations in various ways. One of them is by department, and one of the advantages of that is that you're getting people working together based upon their skills. Notice that employees will, I would prefer to use the word hone their skills here. Because of that, the organizations have a economy of scale, and they can work more fully and integrate more fully because we can direct our activities a lot easier. Notice if we have too many departments that may not communicate well, it kind of tends to be an us versus them mentality. Tend to be a little adverse to external change. People will be trained narrowly. They won't be trained broadly. And because of everybody having the same skill or same skill set, they'll tend to think of themselves as invincible and engaged in what's known as groupthink. Now, different ways to departmentalize. This is by product. There's another one here by function. We move on to some other ones by customer group, by geography, by process. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on those. Those are all really self-explanatory. These are ways to structure an organization. We have line organizations, line of staff, matrix style, and then cross-functional. And we're going to look at each of these. Line organization has direct two-way communication for responsibility, authority, etc. Here, everybody's reporting to one person. No specialists, and that takes in legal and HR and things of that nature. Line managers give direction, and they make sure things get done. There's a little bit more on those things here. And let's notice that line personnel have authority to make policy decisions. Staff people are specialists. They are there to advise the line people and to assist them in some places, but they are not there to tell them necessarily what to do. Here's a idea of a line and staff organization. Notice the chief executive officer, the plant manager, and those people underneath him are line people. Human resources department, legal department, marketing research are staff people. Now they can come down and they can tell the line people, okay, based upon our expertise, this is what you should do, but the line people don't have to follow. And in some cases, that causes a lot of angst. A matrix organization brings in specialists from different parts of the organization. They work together temporarily on a specific plan or project, but they are still part of their original department. Notice what emphasis here: product development, creativity, et cetera, et cetera. Once their job is finished, they will go back to work. This is just a sample matrix organization. You can see this depicted in figure 8.7 on page 225. Here are some advantages. Flexibility in assigning people based upon our expertise. Get more cooperation because you have teamwork. You get more creativity because you're bringing people in with different perspectives, and you're using your resources wisely and efficiently. Notice what the disadvantages are. It's costly and complex. It's temporary solution to a potential long-term problem. Teams are not permanent, and they still belong to their original boss. Cross-functional and self-managed teams. Again, bringing people in the cross-functional, bringing people of different departments who work together Notice on a long-term basis versus matrix, which is short-term basis. Creating long-term teams is better. And then if you're empowering the teams to be self-managed, they do everything for themselves. Hire, fire, set schedules, suppliers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Notice that the cross-functional team works best when they're working for the customer. Real-time business comes in things like networking and things of that nature. Transparency and various and virtual corporations. Transparency, obviously, we talked about that before. Here is, notice that electronic information is shared as if companies were one. So it's more than one company working together. Virtual corporation is a temporarily networked organization or organizations. It's made up of interchangeable firms. This gives you an idea of that. Virtual corporation, you can see this figure 8.8 in your text on page 227. Benchmarking and core competence. Benchmarking is when an organization compares and contrasts its practices with those of an organization that's considered to be a leader in the field. Here it says world's best, that's fine, but a leader in the field. Core competencies are what an organization does better than other people do. And what is said is that an organization should concentrate on its core competencies, that is what it does better than anybody else, and outsource those competencies or those tasks that don't fall into core competencies. Now remember, when I talk about outsource, I'm not talking about outsourcing outside the United States. Adapting to market change. Change isn't easy. This shows a picture of a typewriter. I don't know if you can still buy a typewriter in the United States. The only typewriter company that I know of is Olivetti, which is Italian, and I have no idea whether or not it is still successful. We have to consider this. Restructuring is something all companies have to do, think about, redesign. You have to be more efficient, more effective, and more nimble. An inverted organization simply turning that pyramid that we looked at before on its head. And notice here what we're trying to get at is that the manager's job now becomes one of facilitator. Notice they use the word assist or support frontline workers, not to boss them around. But facilitator makes sure that those people have the resources they need to do their jobs. If they don't have those resources, they're going to be in big time trouble. Organization culture. This is what the organization espouses. These are our values. This is what we stand for. This is how we expect our employees to operate. Widely shared values within the organization brings us together, helps us stay together. Now, you have some other things here. You have countercultures and things of that nature that you have to be concerned about. And you really can't afford to have those, especially if there's a culture that's trying to do away with what the organization stands for. Culture is built up around stories and traditions and myths. Several kinds of organization. I have the formal organization that tells us what to do. We know what these people are supposed to be doing, its responsibility and authority and things of that nature. Notice it's often slow, it's sometimes bureaucratic, but it does give us authority and it does give us line of communication, etc. We also need an informal organization. Those sometimes run by what we know as the grapevine, and they help us foster relationships. And in some cases, help us put the oil where it needs to be so the wheels of motion go as continuously as possible. Informal organizations are unstructured, and as such, you can't expect them to function as well as the formal organization, and they tend to be emotional. So little problems here. And notice also, because of the informal organization, they may have gotten some power that to which they're not entitled, and it can cause a lot of resistance. Now, the last thing we want to talk about is just mentions here group norms for informal organizations. I'm just going to put this slide up here and let you know it. A couple of things here: respect and help your fellow group members. Certainly something that we can all agree to. And then last is something I'll also agree to as well. That is, drinking is never done on the job. That brings us to the end of Chapter 8. It's 5:47. We'll take a break till 5:50 and come back and talk about Chapter 9. Please come back at 5:50. Thank you. Should be finished. All right, we're back, 5:50, Chapter 9, Production and Operations Management. Let's look at the learning objectives for Chapter 9. Describe the current state of U.S. manufacturing and what manufacturers have done to become more competitive. Describe the evolution from production to operations management. Identify various production processes and describe techniques that improve productivity, including computer-aided design and manufacturing, flexible manufacturing, lean manufacturing, and mass customization. Describe operations management, planning issues, including facility location, layout, materials requirement planning, purchasing, just-in-time inventory control, and quality control. And then finally, we're going to explain the uses of PERT and Gantt charts. We hear a lot about this today. We heard a lot about it during the presidential campaign, and that is that we're lagging in manufacturing. And I submit to you that we're not lagging in manufacturing. We just don't emphasize manufacturing in the United States the way we used to. We still have manufacturing, and manufacturing is doing better than what a lot of people say it does. I mean, we still produce a number of cars. We still produce an awful lot of chips for our computers. We do a lot of other production that people don't think about. And we think about production jobs that we've lost. If we don't do much in things like woolens, clothing, etc. And those jobs aren't going to come back. And one of the reasons those jobs aren't going to come back is because they're labor intensive. And they're not, much of it's not done by machine. And so if it were done by machine, we'd see those jobs come back. But if those jobs would come back, or if that manufacturing would come back, it'd be done by machines and we wouldn't be hiring as many people. And we're into a different economy. And one of the things we have to talk about and we have to address is that we have to be able to think about creating jobs that pay the same amount of money or close to the same amount of money that the jobs we lost pay. And what's happened is most of the jobs we're creating quite a number of jobs. They're not paying that same amount of money. So that's a gap, and we have to address that gap. But it's foolish to say that we can bring those jobs back because it's not going to happen for a whole number of reasons. Global competition certainly being one. This just gives you an idea of what's made in the United States. And I'm not going to dwell on this, but a lot of these things are still made here. And some of them we don't want to be made. Most of us don't think smoking is such a good idea. I certainly don't. Not trying to put myself ahead of anybody else, but you know, the outcome for smoking is not good. So we make all those things. And these are top 10 manufacturers. These are top paying service jobs in the United States, which we're not going to spend much time on it. But now we're going to talk about production and production management. Production management, or production itself, is the creation of goods, not services, goods, using the factors of production we talked about before, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and knowledge. I forgot land, excuse me. Those are the factors of production. Production management is everything that managers do to help the firms and organizations they work for create those goods. However, we have moved from production management to what is known as operations management. Now, that doesn't say we don't still have production management around. We do, but operations management is more encompassing because notice what it takes into besides production itself. Inventory, quality control, follow-up services, and notice again here at the top, it's a specialized area of management that is used to convert raw material into finished product and our services. We don't often think of operations management being in the service sector because the service sector usually is doing things that we can't hold in our hands or see or smell or touch, etc. But notice what it's about, creating good experience for customers. And so it talks about Ritz-Carlton Hotel, what it does, and how it uses operations to enhance the customer's stay at the hotel. Now here's the production process. And it's as simple as what it shows here. And we're not going to try to embellish it any more than what is necessary. And you can see it at the bottom of page 247, figure 9.1. Inputs to 5 factors of production. Goes to production itself. And notice what we have in here in production, things that we talked about before on the previous couple of previous slides. And you could say here, if you wish, that this notice is production control, but you could say this is the process area, the transformation area. It's going to turn it into outputs, finished goods, and services. Now this is Andrew Grove. Remember I spoke about him a couple of minutes ago. And he talks about the 3 requirements that an organization has in production. To manufacture what the customer wants in response to his or her needs and or wants, and get it to him when he or she expects it. To produce it at an acceptable level of quality. Now, in many cases here, it was to meet the customer's expectations, and now we want to say to exceed the customer's expectations, and then finally, to deliver that product or service at the highest possible quality, lowest possible price. We have 2 kinds of production here. We have one known as process and the other known as assembly. The process is physically changing something. And the assembly process is putting together the different components. So we have a physical change in process, and you have an assembly by putting together in the other. And we also have things that are known as continuous process, production process, and intermittent process. Continuous process, think of that as what it says here on the slide, long production runs over a period of time. And intermittent, these are short production runs, and this allows the producer to adjust the operating machines, if you will, frequently or as needed to produce other products. Now, these are things that manufacturers are doing, techniques that they're using or that they've adopted to help companies in the United States, manufacturing in the United States, be more competitive, using things like computer-aided design and manufacturing, flexible manufacturing, lean manufacturing, and mass customization. Now let's talk about these. With the computer, using the computer, you have 2 ways to go here. You have computer-aided design, and then you have computer-aided manufacturing. Computer-aided design is exactly what it says. You're using the computer to help design the products you intend to manufacture. Whereas computer-aided manufacturing is using the computer in the actual manufacturing process. Now, computer-integrated manufacturing is something different. It's uniting the computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing. So it's taking, if you will, the best of both techniques and putting them together. Notice that it is expensive but it cuts almost 80% of the production time. And so if you can reduce production time, you're going to get cost savings in a different area. Flexible manufacturing. Notice that using designing machines to do more than one task. And this uses the Allen Bradley Company here. Used 26 machines and robots build, test, and package parts. Now notice that in that particular bullet here, you didn't see any mention of an employee. Now, it is possible that employees may be operating the machines, but they're not operating the robots. And this is what has cost us loss of jobs in the manufacturing sector. It is not because we've eliminated jobs. We haven't eliminated jobs. We've just put different things to work to do those jobs. Robots can do routine tasks better than humans can. And, you don't have to pay them. You have to give them a little oil once in a while, make sure they're up to speed, and maybe retool them after so many miles. But you don't pay them a penny. I want to point out to you that as of today, and remember I'm talking about things that automation coming in and the loss of people having driving jobs, etc. The most important, as of today, the most important resource that any organization has is its humans, its employees. But at the same time, it is its most expensive resource. And companies are looking to save money. Companies need to return money to their shareholders and stockholders. They're going to try to do what they can to reduce that. What we have to do as a society is to figure out how we can re-employ those people that have lost their jobs due to automation and give them the opportunity to have jobs that make the same amount of money. Lean manufacturing, exactly what it says. We're going to use less of everything. Raw materials, fewer humans, employees, fewer defects, less floor space, carry less inventory. Now, why is that important? We're going to talk about that a little bit later when we get to just-in-time inventory. When you carry inventory, it costs you. You have to store it. You're paying for heating. You're paying maybe for security, paying for a separate storage facility. So the less that you can store inventory, the better off you are. Years ago, and I've not kept up with it, but years ago, 8% of your money went to inventory. So if you can reduce that, it's certainly going to help. Mass customization, simply tailoring products to meet a large number of customers. More manufacturers are learning to customize, and of course we can do this in other areas as well. Robotics and sensing. We talked about robots. I'm not going to talk too much more about them, but sensors are used to detect problems. And again, it's something that is better than a human. This lets us know what needs to be fixed, what needs to be corrected, what needs to be adjusted before there's problems. So we need to think about all these things. And the problem is, and I'm not a doom and gloom person. I don't mean to sound like the problem is we don't think about these things ahead of time. And that's why I was talking about this automation coming along. We have no idea of the impact that's going to cause on the workforce in the United States, let alone the world. We don't know. We've not thought about it. We're interested in innovation. We're interested in getting to the cutting edge of technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those things are good. but you can only, those things are only done in a vacuum certain ways. Once they go into production or become used throughout the world, then if you don't do something with it, it's going to cause a problem. And those are issues we have to address today. And I would tell you that we're not prepared to do that. That we need to have that conversation, and we need to do something to help people who've been put out of work. Now, we talked about operations management before, but this is other things that operations management's into. And these are all important things. Where you're going to locate your facility, what kind of facility layout. And by the way, I would mention to you here to pay attention to the Ball video number 9. Really talks about this. Materials requirement planning, purchasing, inventory control, quality control. The thing about location is, you hear this all the time. You heard about a home. Location, location, location. The same thing is true for a business. You want to put a business close to your customers and your suppliers. That cuts down on transportation costs. It cuts down on delivery costs. Transportation to you, delivery to your customers. It really is important to make sure that that's located. And the Ball video will point that out to you. Oh, this is just talking about management operations on the internet, something that should be done. A future facility location, something is very important here. You really have to pay attention to this. Notice that information technology has allowed people to work from home. I have a good friend of mine who works for AT&T, has worked for them for quite a number of years. He works from home 1 day a week. And he likes it, and he and his boss agreed to it, etc. Other people work longer. I had a student here at Union who worked for Sarah Lee. She worked from her home and did that all the time. You can do that. We're going to talk about telecommunicating a little bit later. But one of the biggest issues of this is that on this side of the divide is home. On that side of the divide is work, and we can't intersperse the two. Facility layout. One of the big things about facility layout is making sure that we are efficient in being able to do what it is we intend to do. And, there's ways to do that. We're going to talk about this. You can do assembly line. You can do modular. We'll see some of these graphically displayed here. You can do fixed position, and you can do process. Assembly line is exactly what it says. That's the automobile industry. You work on assembly line. Automobile starts out here, and I do something, and I ship it down someplace else, and somebody else does something. Modular layout, a little bit different here. You get teams together to work on complex manufacturing. Fixed position is what it says. Everybody can be around the product itself. And in process, similar equipment and functions are grouped together. So now we're going to look at this, and here's an assembly line layout. And you can see if this is graphically displayed in your text. I want to get to the right page for you. You can find it at figure 9.2 on page 256. The entire page is devoted to that. Then we have the modular layout. It's different tools that we need to use, and then here's the assembly tables over here. Then we have the fixed position layout, which is a house. And notice that everybody here at the house could be working in different areas, masons, electrical contractors, etc. Once you have the house, the shell of the house put up, everybody can do work. Purchasing is what it says. We're going to buy the materials and resources that we need from the suppliers, from the best suppliers, those that give us what we want, the quality we're looking for, and we're going to try to negotiate the best possible price. Obviously, the internet has really helped in purchasing. Now, this is a type of purchasing that has gone on for some period of time. It really is very important to manufacturers. I talked about what it costs you to hold your inventory in control. This is just-in-time inventory. And here, the manufacturer, and I'm only going to use that term, negotiates with a supplier or perhaps two suppliers to have merchandise, change that away, have raw material ready for him or her, for the manufacturer, when he or she needs it. So you remember, this has to be a good relationship, and that the two have to rely on each other. And so we've picked you out, Mr. Supplier, because you have quality merchandise. But we want you to hold that for us, or to have it on hand for us, or to be able to get it for us when we need it. We don't want to keep it in here and pay money to have our money tied up on inventory. So notice you have to have good cooperation. They say excellent, yes, outstanding, whatever word works best for you. Quality control, we talked about this a little bit in the last chapter when we talked about the control process. And I have a specific bias to this. I think quality control isn't quality control, because the way we define quality control in the United States for a long period of time was to have a couple of inspectors at the end of the production line, and they picked up the finished material and said, okay, it meets specifications, we ship it. Okay, it doesn't meet specifications, we throw it over here in the scrap heap. I say you have to have quality control. I like to use the term quality assurance, but that's irrelevant, throughout the entire production process. So you're not waiting to the end just to maintain your scrap heap. If you have problems in the production operation, and it has to be addressed today, now, not when it gets to the end of the production line. And you say, okay, it's defective, I can't sell it. So we want to reduce errors all along the production process, not at the end, because we're not solving any problems at the end. We're simply throwing stuff out. There are a number of quality control measures that companies use to increase quality. One is Six Sigma, which has been adopted by, among others, General Electric Corporation. Allows 3.4 defects per million opportunities. Now, I had a student a couple of years ago who objected to that, said, why would anybody accept any defect? Well, I think the thing we have to look at here is that we know that defects are going to occur. That's a natural course of events for a whole raft of reasons. Perhaps none of them good, but they are going to happen. So what we want to do is adopt something, some procedure that reduces the number of errors that we're going to have. And if we tell people, our employees, that we are focused on reducing errors, I can assure you that's what they're going to do, because employees do what the boss checks up on. Now, of course, there's other things that we could use, a thing called statistical quality control. Monitor all phases of the production process. We can use statistical process control, testing samples, a statistical random number of samples, different stages of production, or each stage of production. And in measuring the quality along the production process, as I have said, not just because I've said it, but it's something that's been ingrained in me, reduces the need for quality control at the end. So I like to call that quality assurance, and I like to say quality control is something we shouldn't use a term, even though we did introduce it here. I don't like it. I've never liked it, and it's not something I'm going to back off on. It's just not something I care about. ISO, International Organization for Standardization. Worldwide Federation of National Standards, ISO 9000, Quality Management and Assurance Standards, ISO 14000, a collection of best practices for managing an organization's impact on the environment. I'll read those to you because most of us in the United States are not real familiar with ISO, but I can assure you if an organization does not have, an American organization, does not have one of these or both of these ISO standards affixed to what it does, it will not do business in the European Union. Now, the last two things we're going to talk about are PERT charts and Gantt charts. PERT stands for Program Evaluation and Review Technique. It's something that manufacturers and other people use to analyze the tasks involved in completing a project and then seeing about how long it's going to take to complete them. Here's the steps involved in using a PERT chart. You have to analyze the tasks and the steps, estimate time needed. Then you're going to draw a PERT network illustrating those first two steps, and then identify what's known as the critical path. CPM, critical path method, is also known. That's the sequence of tasks that takes the longest time to complete. And once you know that, it makes it a little bit easier to do that. A Gantt chart, named after Henry Gantt, one of the founder and one of the time and motion people and a disciple of the Gilberts, and we'll talk about them next week, is a bar graph. And by the way, you can see these two figures in your text. PERT chart at the bottom of page 260, a Gantt chart in the middle of page 261. Shows what projects are being worked on and how much has been completed. And this will give you an idea here of a Gantt chart, in particular as a doll factory. And it just tells you what has to be done, the length of time, approximate length of time it's going to be done, etc. It just gives you an idea of what you need to do. It helps in the planning process, and these are good charts to use. Do you have to use them? No. It's just another tool to help you in production and operations management. That brings us to the end of our 3 chapters tonight. And the lecture discussion question for tonight is, if you will refer to page 216, Max Weber pretty much aligned his principles of organization along those with Henri Field, but he added 4 particular principles. They're outlined on page 216. Job descriptions, written rules, decision guidelines, and detailed records, consistent procedures, regulations, and policies, and finally, staffing and promotion based upon qualifications. Which of those 4 do you think is most important and why? Which of those 4 do you think is least important and why? So please look at page 216 at the 4 principles that Weber added to Fayol. Which of those 4 principles of Weber's do you think is most important and why? Which of those 4 principles of Weber's do you think is least important and why? And that brings us to the end of this evening. I thank you for your attention and good night.